Welcome all to a conversation with Robert Bartholomew. First, for those not in the know, please tell the viewers who you are.
I'm an honorary senior lecturer in the Department of Psychological Medicine at the University of Auckland in New Zealand, and I've been studying outbreaks of mass psychogenic illness now for the last 35 years, that and social panics.
I want to let the viewers know that I first learned of you when Havana syndrome became news back in 2017, I think it was. So in the beginning, it was actually referred to as sonic attacks in Cuba, at least on Wikipedia. And being an engineer and having worked on weapons systems, the claims being made, the damage that was being done supposedly by energy weapons sounded to me ridiculous. So my skeptical alarms all went off. I read as much as I could find. And when I got a job writing for Skeptical Inquirer, I reached out to you on this subject, right? So can you describe what the US government had said was going on and what was their evidence?
In late 2016, there was an intelligence officer in Cuba who heard strange sounds outside his home. And then in December, he had head pain, an earache, and some difficulty hearing. He went to the embassy clinic and he said, you know, it's as if someone's pointing a beam of sound at my home at night. And when a couple of other officers said the same thing, this folk theory emerged that the Cubans, working perhaps with the Russians or the Chinese, were harassing American diplomats and intelligence officers with some type of sonic weapon using sound. And they came to that speculation because there's a long history in Cuba of American diplomats being harassed. For example, people wake up in the morning and you'd walk downstairs and there'd be cigarette butts on your kitchen table and you don't smoke. There'd be dog poo on your kitchen floor and you don't have pets.
Much worse than the cigarettes.
Yeah, much worse. And so anyway, that's why they thought that. And that's the thing with mass psychogenic illness. They are all couched in a key social, cultural, political, historical context. And that was the context. They just don't suddenly happen. And that's the job of the researcher, is to look at the information and figure out the context and what generated the anxiety, because all of these cases are triggered by anxiety as well. And so anyway, in a nutshell, they started searching for unicorns when they should have stuck to horses, more mundane explanations. There was some bad science, there was some bad journalism, and there was some botched government. And that added up to Havana syndrome, which went on for 6.5 years, about 6 years too long. In December of 2017, I published the first journal article, medical article on Havana syndrome in the Journal of the Royal Society of Medicine. And I said the claims were unsound. That's a direct quote. And basically that article has stood the test of time. Now on March 1st of this year, 5 different American intelligence agencies have concluded that there was no evidence of any foreign actor, and that what happened was you got an array of existing medical conditions, environmental circumstances and conditions, and anxiety adding up to Havana syndrome. And, you know, when people say, oh, it's mass psychogenic illness, not necessarily. I'd say the majority of cases weren't mass psychogenic illness. There were simply people waking up and hearing strange sounds and having been told if you hear a strange sound, it might be a sonic attack and later a microwave attack. And so they hear the sound, they expect to feel symptoms, and they do, or they feel symptoms of something, and then they look around for a sound. And of the first 21 victims, 8 recorded their attacks. And later, in a classified study that was not released under the Freedom of Information Act until September of 2021, this group of scientists had analyzed 8 of those recordings, and they concluded they were the mating call of the Indies short-tailed cricket. But that wasn't released. And the FBI report, which concluded it was mass psychogenic illness back in 2018, that still hasn't been released. So I like to say, in a nutshell, this is a case of politics mixing with science. And that's why it took so long. You add lawyers to the mix and you got your 6.5 years.
Yeah. So I read your book and I found it so fascinating. I did a official book review for Skeptical Inquirer, although it was years after it was printed because Havana Syndrome was back in the news. I had watched a report on 60 Minutes on CBS where they were saying that even people behind the gates at the White House were not safe.
That's right. And that, that was so upsetting because I grew up really worshiping 60 Minutes. And then they put trash TV on like that. And I never talk like that, but it's upsetting because they were interviewing this guy who claimed he and his family in China had been attacked and stuff like this. And they came back to the US and they're staying in a hotel in Philadelphia. And they were being checked out by some doctors nearby. And he claimed in the middle of the night that he saw one of his children thrashing around in bed, and then the other one was thrashing. And he picked one of them up and he heard this whooshing sound like water running. Then when he picked the other one up, he heard the same thing. And the implication was in that show that it might have been some type of microwave attack by a foreign power, perhaps the Russians. And I have no problem with them speculating about that. But the problem was that is such a common symptom, and they should have known this. It's a common symptom of tinnitus. In fact, there's a article online that says, is that the water running or is that tinnitus? That was the title.
So
because it's such a common symptom.
How does a big news agency like that know? Or do you think they know that and didn't care?
I think they knew, and they just presented one side. That's a tip-off, and clicks and views, and it's really unfortunate. And look, that's what happened with the National Academy of Sciences study. They were interviewing outliers. David Relman at Stanford University, great scientist for microbiology, but not for the vestibular system in the inner ear. And they were saying, oh, it's pulse microwave radiation. There was only one other study that suggested that. That was the small study that the FBI had commissioned. And the thing in common there was it was David Relman, who's the head of that study as well. Nobody else, none of the other panels or studies concluded it was pulse microwave radiation. So, and so they were interviewing all these outlier scientists. They didn't interview the mainstream scientists, the mainstream skeptics. None of us were interviewed.
With the report on the 1st of this month, do you think this is the end of it? I read that Marco Rubio, who my recollection is way back when this started, was complicit in actually pointing the blame with no evidence that it was definitely something that we were attacked in Cuba. He released a statement saying basically, I don't believe anything in that report.
Yeah. I think this is finally the beginning of the end. It will now slowly fade away, because in the past, people were skeptical of us. And now with the agencies aligning what we said all along, in that classified government report from 2018, did an update in November of 2021, and they cited myself and Professor Ballo at UCLA all over the place. And I think the CIA report, when the full report's released, will cite us as well. And I do think it's the beginning of the end here. But you do have lawyers involved. They won't go quietly. But I think it's just going to slowly now die off, because it's just not sound science. It never was sound science. And now people are realizing that, taking the time to actually read the bad studies that were done and published in one of the best journals in the world, the Journal of the American Medical Association. They published 2 really bad studies that should never have seen the light of day. And that's not an opinion. It's a fact. Anybody that looks at that is a competent neurologist or medical practitioner. It was just bad science.
Okay, so Havana Syndrome, hopefully water under the bridge. Let's talk about a new subject. So actually, I'm talking to you today because you contacted me and said, hey, how do you like that Wikipedia article about the poisonings in Iran of schoolgirls? And I had no knowledge of this. I hadn't seen the article. I didn't even see that story on the news. Somehow I missed it, if American news is covering it. It's not that many months old, and it's like a continuing story. So, you want to tell people what that's about in general.
Well, that's flown under the radar. It started in November of last year, and it really blew up recently with a major case that got a lot of publicity. And the story is that the Iranian government has been poisoning schoolgirls with some type of toxic gas. And so about 8 or 9 days ago, when they had
But
a
can I
major
stop you there?
case.
Why just schoolgirls? Are the two genders educated separately in Iran? So it's a different environment or something? Like, why would it just be girls?
Yeah, there's a lot of schools with just girls, and so they're supposedly targeting those girls as retribution for these headscarf protests that have been going on, and other protests as well. And so you hear that and you think, wow, that's terrible. I heard that, and it's like, wow, schoolgirls are being poisoned. That's a bad thing. But then when you start to look at the case closer, over the first 3 months, no suspect had been captured or even identified. No gas had been identified. No one had died. Everybody recovered quickly. It's a group of young girls during an extraordinary period of stress and turmoil in the government. And what do these young girls have in common? They're not able to get redress, right? In terms of, if they're not happy with something, you just can't complain to authorities, right? And this outbreak was very similar to what happened in Afghanistan between 2009 and 2018. In fact, the headlines are virtually identical.
So I saw that comparison made on the Wikipedia article, and I'm not familiar with the story. What's that story quickly?
And so during 2009 to 2018, you had at least 60 schools where you had mass poisonings of young Afghan schoolgirls, and they rushed to hospital. Nobody ever died, never found the toxin or anything like that. And then there were several studies. I was involved in one study in Herat province in 2015. We concluded it was mass psychogenic illness. Then the World Health Organization concluded 22 cases were mass psychogenic illness. The United Nations did a separate study. They concluded it was mass psychogenic illness. And between 2002 and 2014, there was this international military monitoring force there. They concluded their own study that it was mass psychogenic illness. And so you've got these headlines. You could take the same headline from Afghanistan, interchange it with what's going on right now in Iran, and it's the exact same thing. Now, in the past 48 hours, the supreme leader in Iran has said he believes it's some type of poisoning, and they will capture these people and they will bring them to justice. Coincidentally, after 3.5 months, all of a sudden, they've found people and they've arrested them and charged them with the poisonings. And to me, that's highly suspicious. Same thing happened in Afghanistan. They rounded people up, and I think the government showing that they're trying to do something, and they're trying to show that it's real. And so what you've got going here is you've got two groups, and you've got the opposition in Iran who hate the government. You've got the government who loathe the opposition. And neither one want the mass psychogenic illness explanation to be true, because each one wants to demonize the other. The opposition want the government to look like, they're so bad. You know how bad they are? They will poison young schoolgirls and put their lives in danger, and they just don't care. That's how low they are. And the government's trying to do the same thing with the opposition. And
so what justification are they saying the opposition is? What would the rationale of the opposition be for poisoning schoolgirls?
To make the government look bad. To make it look like, oh, the government, they're bad. They're poisoning these schoolgirls. And look, anybody who's poisoning young schoolgirls needs to get a better PR person, right? Because it's just ridiculous. Like, it's not going to go well publicly, right? And so you've got this back and forth going on, and I got caught up on it because I had made some statements that I believe this has all the hallmarks of mass psychogenic illness, which I stand by. And then I had all these trolls coming at me with death threats and saying that, oh, this isn't true. You're a puppet for the Iranian government. And I'm like, no, I'm just making this assessment. And oh, you need to stop talking about this. And I'm like, no. And I've done a number of interviews now. I just did one with the Telegraph. And look, within the past 24 hours, the Iranian health ministry has come out and they have announced that they have had doctors and health specialists go around to schools around the country, and they've investigated these cases, and they have concluded that about 90% are caused by anxiety, which is a code word for mass psychogenic illness. Now, the other 10%, they said it's not caused by a toxic gas, but a mild irritant, and that's the word they used. I think what you're going to find out at the end of the day, when all the dust settles and the fog clears, is that it's going to be 100% that's caused by mass psychogenic illness and a redefining of ever-present symptoms as, being some type of poisoning outbreak.
Frankly, a lot of the symptoms, at least as I saw them described in some of the citations from the Wikipedia article, sound similar to Havana syndrome symptoms. It was fatigue,
that's right.
headaches, nausea. Yeah,
that's right. You can go right down the list. Difficulty concentrating. You know, a common one that people have, they describe it as brain fog. They're like in a fog.
Mm-hmm.
That is a classic description of anxiety.
So I'm actually looking at the Wikipedia article, and there is currently, it's changing a lot quickly because of what's going on, but it says that the Deputy Health Minister, I don't know if I could pronounce his name, Yunus Pani, something like that, he's got the 90% quote, and yeah, that is amazing. But yet, so this just happened, that quote, and yet they've arrested people blaming them for poisoning people. How does they jiving that? How does that work?
Well, it doesn't. But it was interesting because I went on Iranian television a couple of nights ago, and that was an interesting experience. I gave the mass psychogenic illness explanation, and in hindsight, I think they were preparing the public for the 90-10 breakdown. Like, here's this guy arguing it's mass psychogenic illness, and so look, you've got, like, when you know the facts in this case. When you first hear it, it's like, oh, that's terrible. They're poisoning schoolgirls. When you look at the facts in the case, over 120 schools involved. I mean, that's like somebody seeing Bigfoot. And it's like, well, maybe Bigfoot's over here. But then you're seeing Bigfoot in 120 different places. It's like, well, how is that possible? Right? And well, most of them are misperceptions then, but maybe there was a real sighting. And that's the equivalent of what's going on here. Right? And so I think by the government arresting people, it number one shows people supposedly publicly, yes, it's the other side. These evil people are foreigners, right? And we've got them. And then the 10% thing, right, allows for the other 90% to be psychological. And so I guess you could say, they were preparing the public by showing my interview on TV over there. I don't know, but I suspect that might have been the case because I think the writing was on the wall at the time. I think they realized that it is psychogenic because they would have read some of the reports coming out from their own people. And look, it's a pretty standard outbreak, I think. When you clear away all of the politics going on, and that's what it is. It's the politics. You can't stop an idea now on the internet. I mean, people say, oh, you shouldn't give interviews and they're threatening me. Okay, well, I just did an interview with the Telegraph. You're going to stop that? You just can't. So the idea is out there. And what I said was, and I was very polite with these people, I said, look, argue the idea. You make the case that it's not mass psychogenic illness. You show me the evidence that there is a poison gas that's involved here, and I will change my mind. But as a scientist, we go by evidence. And that people often ask me, do you believe in Bigfoot? Do you believe in Havana syndrome? Do you believe in the Iranian schoolgirls being poisoned? It's not a matter of belief, right? It's a matter of evidence and weighing that evidence. Could somebody be going around poisoning young schoolgirls in Iran? Sure, they could. But 120 schools over 3 months, and they didn't even have a suspect. And then all of a sudden, they have all these suspects, right? It just doesn't make sense and they would have known, like if they're doing this, people would just go ballistic, hearing that this was going on and be incensed. And so everybody's trying to use it for their own political gain. And that was the problem with Havana syndrome, right? Havana syndrome was politics mixing with science. And it's the same here. And that's why you get some fogginess right now.
So, yeah, what's your, if you had to be a betting man, how would you bet this is going to, how long is this going to go on for before it drifts away and they just forget about it and say, okay, I guess
depends. Look, like Havana syndrome, it depends on how the media covers this, and you can hype stories up and things like this. But I think that, it could go on a little while longer, but, it's so clear the historical antecedents in this case. I mean, this is virtually identical to what happened in Afghanistan from 2009 to 2018. And there, as I mentioned, they ended up having 60 schools affected, 60 separate cases. Now, you've got 1983, the disputed West Bank region in the Middle East. You had over 1,000 schoolgirls, Palestinian mostly, who were affected by poison gas. The theory was that Mossad agents were deliberately poisoning them. As it turned out, there were 3 different investigations, 2 published in The Lancet, 1 published in the American Journal of Psychiatry. All 3 concluded it was mass psychogenic illness, and they traced it back to an odor from a toilet at a girls' school. And it spread from there and in the media. And there was 1 media report in particular that was cited in the American Journal of Psychiatry that was particularly egregious to spreading that outbreak. And that was this media report in an Israeli newspaper that said, now some of the symptoms included blurry vision. Well, instead of blurry vision, he reported that a number of victims had gone blind, which caused panic and really exacerbated the situation. And that's part of the reason for the flare-up there. Look, the United Nations got involved. There was talk of war at the time in 1983. This was a massive thing in 1983 for a couple of months. And I would think that what's going on now isn't going to last more than, I think, a few more weeks at the most. But you do have the fog of, maybe not of war, but of conflict over there. The Iranian government doesn't have a great track record in terms of, what they say. On the other hand, the opposition, some of the things they say are pretty extreme as well. And the truth's probably somewhere in between. But in cases like this, look, it's not in anybody's interest to poison young schoolgirls. And so look, for the thing that stuck out in my mind was when I first heard this, and it blew up in the news about 8-10 days ago, was the 3.5 months that it had been going on at that point for at least 3 months. And they didn't have a suspect. They didn't have a toxic agent, a rapid spread and recovery, a group of young Islamic schoolgirls who the rumor was were being targeted because of their opposition with the hijab headscarf rules and stuff like that. That just was a giant red flag and a flashback to Afghanistan and what went on there. And then a flashback to what went on in the Middle East and the 1983, I think it was March, April of 83, and then that died down. And it's a flashback to what happened in 1993 north of Cairo, when you had about 1,500 young schoolgirls who had these symptoms that were supposedly poisoned as well. Turned out that there's no evidence of that. And so I guess they're seen as a vulnerable group in society. And you know, whenever something like that happens, it probably flourishes because it's an easy way to demonize the other side, that they are so low and they are so deprived that they would go to such lengths as to do something like that. Now, there's another interesting aspect to this case in Iran, and that is typically with an outbreak of mass psychogenic illness, when you get multiple outbreaks like this and you get a wave, there is an initial sensational case. Well, you had cases here, then you had this big blow up case. And then what happened was you had all these cases right afterwards spread around the country. That's classic. And what you got there is, like UFOs, like Bigfoot, they report this, mass media, social media, be on the lookout for a toxic gas. And the rumor is that young schoolgirls are being targeted as retribution for not wearing their headscarves and protesting. Now, schoolgirls across Iran are hypervigilant about their environment, their surroundings. And they ordinarily, you know, you get cooking stalls and food stalls and all kinds of smells. Ordinarily wouldn't pay too much attention, but now that smell you smell might be poison gas.
Hypersensitive, just like the people in Cuba who were warned to listen for any strange sounds, and then they heard, you know, insect noises, and they had never paid attention to it before. Now all of a sudden it was, oh, we were warned about that noise, and then they get a headache and they connect it.
That's right, exactly what's going on. And so in a situation like that where people are hypervigilant and the rumor is out there that something's going on, if it's Bigfoot, a rustling in the bushes becomes Bigfoot. A light in the night becomes an extraterrestrial spaceship. A wake or log on a lake becomes the Loch Ness Monster. And here, ever-present smells in the environment, whether it's from flowers, whether it's from some industry, whether it's somebody cooking, they become more sensitive to those smells in their environment, and they start to misperceive them as an immediate threat. Some girl, they're in their under a very stressful situation anyway, they start to hyperventilate. Everyone sees that, becomes really very excited. And the next thing you know, you got 30 girls being rushed to hospital, believing a headache, nausea, dizziness, even convulsions. Then they think they've been attacked by a poison. They check them out at the hospital. There's no evidence of it. Now there's a mystery poison, right? And that's what you get with a lot of cases of mass psychogenic illness, especially the one-off cases. If you go online and type in mystery illness, that's usually what the first case was described as, a mystery illness.
So the last thing, I don't remember if we talked about this when I interviewed you for the Philadelphia Skeptic Group, but it fascinates me, so I'll bring it up again here, even if we did talk about it, is the people who consider themselves targeted individuals. And you know, my coworker of mine's son was in that class. My wife had a patient who would fall into that category. And for people who don't know what that is, they think that they're being observed and their house is being bugged. Sometimes they think they have implants in them. And my perception is, in the old days before social media, they would have just had this delusion and it was carried around on their own. But now you find other people who believe this on the internet, and they're in, you know, private groups who all reinforce these beliefs.
Yeah, I can tell you right now that I've gotten a lot of emails from these people. My colleague, Robert Barlow, has. I know David Relman made a comment that he received a number of comments from these people as well, who believe, oh, Havana syndrome, that's nothing new. I've been hearing these voices for decades now, and they call it cyber stalking, and they set up some kind of equipment nearby in the room next to them. And look, I think that most of those people need to see a psychiatrist because they have a psychiatric condition. And if they have not been diagnosed with one, well, maybe it's an undiagnosed condition or some kind of condition we don't fully understand yet, but I don't think it's normal to hear voices. But look, in the past, some people became the heads of religious movements.
Prophets, still today they hear voices supposedly in many religions. Yeah, and they got a new direction from God to tell the people. Yeah, so my perspective on the TI thing is that I think there's a problem giving, sending them to a psychiatrist because they're not going to trust a psychiatrist. As soon as they tell them that it's not real and they have a problem, by the way, take these meds, they're going to think, oh, you're going to put microchips in the meds, and they're not going to take them. So I don't know how you help somebody like that. But certainly it's not helping to read in the media that Havana syndrome is real. It gives them one more point for their belief in this thing that is not likely to be real.
Yeah, it was really, Havana syndrome was bad science, bad government, and bad journalism. And it's really unfortunate. I mean, things like that can go on, but it shouldn't have gone on for as long as it did. I think the big factor that was different there was social media, and we live in a partisan age. And I've always said, many people have stopped searching for information, and instead they're out searching for confirmation of their pre-existing beliefs. And psychology even has a name for that. It's called confirmation bias, the tendency to seek out information that reinforces our pre-existing biases, stereotypes, and beliefs.
And then you just disregard anything that's opposed to that.
That's right. And I think you're seeing that with Iran right now. And, both sides, neither want to believe it. And that's a problem when neither want to believe it. And they look for little things about how it can't be true and stuff like this. Somebody said there was a case at a bus stop. Okay, there was a case at a bus stop. Suddenly that doesn't make this not true. Or one of them wasn't a schoolgirl. Okay, one of them wasn't a schoolgirl. But I can tell you, over the past, 3.5 decades, I've got over 3,500 cases I've collected of mass psychogenic illness. 99% are majority female. Why that is open to debate. I would tend to think it's probably not as much biological or innate genetics, but the roles of people in society. And what's really interesting with Iran is Malaysia, because I did research in Malaysia for many years. There have been hundreds, and I'm not exaggerating, hundreds of reports in Malaysia since the mid-1960s of mass psychogenic illness in schools involving almost all Malay, Muslim, young female schoolgirls. And very, very similar. There's no means of redress. And instead of a smell, it's usually they're under very pressure cooker situations, and it ends up being dissociation states, and it's perceived as demonic possession.
Oh.
Very common, very common.
Very sad and fascinating. All right, so for people who are very interested in this general topic, tell them a little bit about your book, because as I said, I did a review of it, and I was surprised how much of it wasn't actually about Havana syndrome, but it was describing all of the other historic cases that you've looked at of mass psychogenic illness and making connections to Havana syndrome, but you learn a lot from reading the book. So what else do you cover in the book?
I was going to grab a copy of the book, but I can't find it right now. Somebody's reading it. Well, look, I'm really proud of that book because it has stood the test of time. And what it really does is look at Havana syndrome, this bizarre, novel, never before seen outbreak. And it's like, hold on, this is part of a fabric that has been going on, a theme for a long time. Because at its core, Havana syndrome was really two scares. It was the enemy at the gate scare, the communist scare, and they've infiltrated us. They are attacking us. And at the same time, it was a technology scare. The fear of new technology has been there for a long time. And as I mentioned, whether it's telephone sickness, whether it's railway spine from the late 1800s, or AM radio, or more recently, it's video display terminals in the 1990s. We're going to give your child birth defects, or Wi-Fi, or 5G, or mobile phones, right? And so technology scares are nothing new. And Havana syndrome is old wine in new skins, dressed up for modern day acceptance in something that's much more seen as plausible, right? Because, oh, we have enemies. Okay, they could have developed some kind of weapon. But when you start thinking about it, it's really, why would you spend decades developing a secret weapon, spend all this money, and you're just harassing people with it?
Yeah, you're going to hit people
And
at a hotel in London. Yeah.
why don't they use it in the war in Ukraine?
Right.
Why didn't the Russians have massive sonic weapons or microwave weapons and just point them at Ukraine and just take over?
So what do you think the next scare is going to be?
I think there's always going to be a next scare, a next social panic. My gut feeling is it's going to be food. And you've started to see this now. Over the past year and a half, you had people eating Lucky Charms cereal and posting to the I Am Poisoned website that it was making them sick. And so it's been going for a few years now. But when this happened, we're not just talking a few people. 7,300 people posted to the website claiming that they'd eaten Lucky Charms cereal and it made them sick. So many that the FDA got involved and investigated. General Mills, who makes the cereal, said, look, we can't find anything wrong with the cereal. The FDA investigated, and a while back, they concluded there was nothing wrong with the cereal. And then shortly thereafter, people started posting to the I Am Poisoned website that they ate Cheerios and it was making them sick. And General Mills said, gee, we can't find anything wrong with the Cheerios. And so this is a trend I'm seeing. And things like this can potentially cost companies tens of millions of dollars, right? I mean, look what happened with the Gardasil vaccine for the human papillomavirus. You had a group of schoolgirls in Australia who were being vaccinated. This was around 2006, 2007. A girl fainted. Rest of the girls felt faint and unwell. And even though it turned out to be anxiety, it wiped Australian $1 billion from the share value of Gardasil in just a few days. So this is a real concern.
It's quite amazing. Okay, fascinating subject. I think we can end it there. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Rob.